everyone, welcome to the course on digital media. Welcome back with more understanding of inclusion of the marginalized and how internet based media practices do it. So, let us have a recap of internet and marginalized sections. Earlier in the last session we discussed the process of marginalization and characteristics of the marginalized sections or individuals. We discussed various forms of digital media and their potential as the medium for the marginalized sections by exploring the process of production, mediation and participation. And we realized that how we need to facilitate the exchange of knowledge sets of the marginalized with the rest consistently and widely to mitigate the margins. Today in this section we are moving on the inter-based media practices and the questions of inclusion of the marginalized sections. So, let us ask some questions before we start. So, let us see whether internet is a medium of say egalitarian society or does it push the social sections towards a new form of marginalization where technical access defines participation. So, we need to understand those technicalities involved and then we have to locate the marginalized into the mainstream or say the complete picture. So, these pertinent questions are discussed in this section to explore the theoretical understanding of internet based media practices and the emerging patterns thereof and again with the same question with the exploration of the marginalized sections to locate them where they are into the total arena when we talk about mainstreaming or say inclusion. Okay, so let us begin with looking at certain patterns, the emerging patterns which we see generally in terms of media platforms and media practices related to it. In that we are going to learn today about the concepts such as cyber optimism versus cyber pessimism, or you can say simply cyber optimism, which is a concept as oppositional to cyber pessimism. Then we would be discussing about network embeddedness and heterogeneity. Again we see these two concepts in a relation and also in comparison to look at the inclusivity of say inclusivity of the marginalized sections. Then we are going to divide discuss the question of digital inclusivity in terms of digital divide and how we can move towards the digital citizenship, which would be more inclusive in terms of digital access and where we see the participation of the marginalized sections, which we actually emphasized upon, if you remember in the last section of our discussion, that it is important to make the inclusive society or for mainstreaming of the marginalized. So, let us begin with cyber optimism where we see the free internet interactive democratic medium is formed through digital and internet based technology and media practices. Here the theories or say the understanding of internet based media practices as provided by Manuel Castells and Gustavo Cardoso become important to understand. They say that internet is a catalyst of the structural transformation. Now what do we mean by this structural transformation? For that we need to understand the society with its stratified structures, where we see that the mainstream is there along with the marginalized sections who do not have, you know, a voice when it comes to the mainstreaming or participation, which we actually discussed earlier in terms of socio-political, economic as well as cultural sphere. So, in order to bring them into the mainstream, we see that digital platforms, particularly based into the internet communication, we see that kind of structural transformation is possible with decentralization. Here what do we mean to say is that when we talk about marginalized in terms of vis-a-vis mainstream, we also see that mainstream is a center of say that sphere. So, and we see that centralization actually creates those kind of marginalized areas where we see those sections having no voice for themselves. So, these structural transformations talk about the decentralization, where we see that the voices or say the power is actually decentralized. It reaches to the marginalized sections, and if the spread becomes wider, we see that marginalized automatically coming to the mainstreaming in that manner. So, they have their voice in that sense. They could raise their voice, they could raise their concern, and they can also get the benefit of what we actually see with the centers or mainstreams. So, for that we see that positively internet works toward that. So, moving further, they find the new technological paradigm as interacting and working according to the needs, values and interests of the users in that sense. So, and we have already talked about the decentralized network society. So, now if we talk about more about the practices involved with internet in terms of the positivity it has, we see it is more flexible and participatory communicative platform to cultivate intimacy. Here we have to remember one thing, that internet is a different form when it comes to communication practices. So, unlike the traditional mass communication practices, we see that internet, or that is why it is called new media when it is compared with other mass medium platforms or broadcasting or say circulation of newspapers that way. So, here we see that internet is flexible that way. It provides you with the two-way communication and more feedback, more responses, and automatically we see that those responses are becoming the voices. They also raise concern and they with the critical parameters. So, we see that it is no more the mass communication practice of the earlier traditional media, which was essentially one way, authoritative that way. But here we find that internet provides us with that scope of engaging ourselves in the conversation that remains constructive if it comes to, again, in terms of values, interests and the voices. So, that intimacy is found in this particular form or medium. And moreover, we see that more reciprocity we see in internet based mediums or say forms in that sense. So, moving on the other point, that is the internet based content representing local issues or cultures often offers action driven dialogue. So, it can help to enhance recognition and understanding of difference and contribute to nourishing a richer and more complex global imagination. So, I am citing Shani Orgad here. We need to understand this particular citation or say statement made by Shani Orgad in how the internet works in global arena. So, we see globally we have margins. It is just like community based margin, and if you see it in a wider or say macro level, we find the same kind of marginalization in terms of countries. So, we have developed world and we have the third world as called which consists of say the developing nations. So, in order to understand the need of it, we see right from the micro level to macro level, we see that internet is actually becoming the platform where we are looking at action driven dialogue. So, what do we mean here? Again, in terms of need based communication which is taking place on internet, and it is coming from everywhere. So, we have that network and we have those potential, we have those possibilities here to look at those governing issues, to look at those issues of socio-cultural problems, or say it may be racism, it may be caste or creed or any other difference. So, those differences are mitigated through internet, because then you realize that where the gap is and how you can fill that gap. So, we need to understand it in order of say or in manner of reciprocity. So, if someone communicates about his or her problem on internet, we see it with humanity and we see that collective efforts are also drawn. Sometimes authorities are made alert to listen to those problems, those issues. So, there are various ways, and since we see that the segments, the masses, and not in the sense of a negative sense where we use masses as just to be audience, but here in the active sense, when we see that it actually brings the diverse viewpoints, the diverse solutions to the problem, and we have that option of selecting the best one here. So, from that sense we can see that internet is certainly providing or the media practices, it's a platform for providing media practices which are actually doing the inclusion or say those are easing the process of inclusion in the society. So, moving ahead with the negative notions, because it's just like a coin which having positive along with the negative. So, nothing comes as complete as we know. So, we also see some problems, some challenges when we use internet as in the ambit of media practices. So, we see that if we do not have consistency, depth, completeness or interest, the communication is lost. So, this problem is there, as we discussed in the last section. If you remember, we talked about how the attractiveness is one element or component. If it is not there, if your content is not attractive towards audiences, we do not see that it is making any difference or it is heard even on the platform provided by internet. Okay, whether you visit Facebook or say Instagram or any other social media site for that matter, just observe yourself. What kind of videos, what kind of content goes viral. So you observe it yourself and try to understand it. Then we have these problems cited by various scholars. Let us talk about those issues. So anonymity of sources is the very first issue in question. So since anyone can create the content with any name or any identity which may be not real, it actually poses challenges towards that. And what kind of challenges? In terms of doctored content posted for political agenda or propaganda, we can say. Then it actually aggravate instead of decreasing marginalization because of the same fictionality of the virtual world. So we see that most of the time it is the content which is political in nature, which is sensational, that gets attention of the audiences, and again we see marginalized remain at the margins. We do not see any change there because the voices of the marginalized which do not have attractive stories attached to it, or that attractiveness or sensationalism to attract audiences, it gets lost in the ambit of total content. So such content on internet becomes the cause of sometimes riots, special disturbances we see, and the crimes, internet based crimes, be it abuse, be it trafficking, be it any other crime of that sort. Okay, so we see these problems with the internet, and these are the dark area or say negative attachments to it. So the blurriness between the real and virtual gives way to the unstable order of liquid times, as said by Appadurai. So what do we mean by it? Actually, we actually can relate it with the inconsistency given in the internet based medium itself. We see that content live for very short duration, so it does not have that consistency. It is unstable. Any content is coming from anywhere, and we just see to it in a while. We see one content at a time, we see the other not related content on the other time. So we see that time is liquid in that manner, and again we do not see the stability in the order because it is not consistent that way. So in the same vein, Shani Orgad highlights the problems related to exposure to multiple storytellers. So similarly, we see that one event and there are a lot of perspectives, and all perspectives find a storyteller. So in that sense, we see that those stories are all multiple perspectives we are getting, and then if we are not able to decide upon what is right, we end up in being confused about the things. So that happens when we see when we access to or say we consume internet based content. In the same vein, Don Slatter also cites example how internet based content has enlarged rural urban divide through representing only the urban modernity, and it is again related, if we just concentrate on our discourse so far, we know it has a currency in that, because we see that more urban modernity is getting space on the internet. It is being viral because of the same reason, because it has that attraction towards it. We always are fascinated about, looking at the glimmer of the urban societies. So again, the voices remain unheard that way. Then now we would be moving on the other segment, that is network embeddedness and heterogeneity. Now these are again somewhere contradictory notions or concepts, because heterogeneity is somewhere related to the variety we get, the diversity we get, and where we listen to each one voice in the total atmosphere, or say media sphere. Here it is important to understand that how media practices are embedded in the technology. So the fixtures work at various levels here, in terms of content, in terms of technology usage itself. We see network embeddedness at work. So first of all, we should understand how socially and culturally and even politically it works. So socio-cultural embeddedness could be well observed in terms of the digital technology based cultural material. Now what do we mean by cultural material? The mobile phone you use, the laptop you use, the other accessories with the mobile phone or laptop you use, like the headphones or the mics and all that create the cultural material. And we all know, observe it yourself in your peer, in your surroundings, in your neighborhood, or even in your home. What value do you fix to a particular brand in terms of having a particular kind of mobile phone? So smart mobile phone of a particular brand is that cultural material that you flaunt in your society. Okay, so in that sense we see that somewhere this cultural material is pressurizing the person to take itself. So here the marginalized sections, individuals would be pushed more towards the margins because they would not have those cultural material in hand. And again, in relation to practices like you click on selfies, the way you chat, the emojis you use, for example. So all those, if some person does not know how to go about it, he or she may feel neglected, and again the process will end up in isolation and alienation that way, again marginalizing on the basis of the technology based embeddedness when you relate it with cultural material that way. Then controlled embedded use of machines, sometimes against the benefits of marginalized sections, compromising their own knowledge set again. And here particularly in terms of content, we can have one example that we talked about selfies, we talked about emojis, we talked or GIFs. If you are not able to, if you do not know how to create GIFs or use emojis, then you will somewhere lack interest in creating the content or in terms of your own society. So again, it is very urbane concept of, say, internet based media practices. So it will again detach the marginalized from producing their content. So there will be no knowledge sets of their own. And we also see north-south divide in terms of countries, where we see the developed world vis-a-vis the underdeveloped worlds, and the narratives of transformation into an information society. where we actually see it in when we use this term information society, it is again a notion given by the north to the south, and you are you are being compelled to use those technologies as given. So if you do not use those technologies as given to you in the same frame, in the same structure, you will not be able to reach to the center. So these are the notions critically seen attached with the internet. Then we also see that media constitutes social processes and realities that are mediated and embedded with certain types of fixed visibilities to generate effect. So we know that we need viral videos, we need certain type of language to be given on the internet. We see that if what platforms to be used and in which way. So those fixtures are given in society when it comes to the media itself, or say the technology we use. So embedded process of filter based selection of content and creation of stereotypes are the you can say eventually we get the same stereotype which earlier we used to get with the traditional media. So if we have those the selection is based on these filters, be it on the values of the same sort, we see it ends up in the same kind of practices, and again we see marginalized are not able to get the mainstreaming they deserve. So these were certain issues related to the network embeddedness in terms of again the challenges we face. So from content and socio-cultural embeddedness given in the technology, now we would be coming on the technical part, the pure technical part of embeddedness. We see here that since consistency is needed, since again we see that people are needed to form communities. So virtual communities are formed only when people carry on public discussion over a period of time through intellectual and social organization. And here unfortunately we see that certain ideologies play a role here. So people do form communities, but they are more or less coming from the same ideology. So we do not see any diversity again in the cyberspace in that sense. Another problem is the users' data being analyzed for marketing, and here comes the role of media literacy. Since we are not very literate, we are not very trained to how to use only the needed content. Sometimes we actually are caught by the trap of internet marketing, internet based marketing, or say digital marketing in a simple sense. So there are embedded in-house analytical tools or third-party measurement devices which are reading your needs, and they then you see while surfing the internet the advertisements of same sort of products start popping in, and it actually diverts your attention. Okay, so you have to be very attentive while using these technologies, very you can say focused when you are using these technology. Nevertheless, if one understands the process of embeddedness as we did, one can easily use the same technology as emancipatory media. But this will require a consistent dialogue coming from the marginalized sections or individuals. So consistency is the key. You have to produce the content continuously, there should be no break, and the attributes like hybridism, hypertextuality with possibility of multimedia expansion, that is interconnectedness of information, and content creativity has to be used to enhance that heterogeneity. So, you may create more links, you may use multi-platform content which would have the visibility on, say, Facebook, WhatsApp, website, the simple website, or say Instagram and all other social media. So that way you would be visible on multi platforms with the same content. So it would be having more space, more time, and if it is consistent, it would be coming to the eyes of whosoever is visiting the internet that way. So we can actually remove those challenges through our skills. So for example, content can be added and edited continuously on open websites such as Wikipedia. Again, you may write blogs, you go for video blogs as well, which would be more attractive and which would be more engaging that way. So these are that is how you go for expansion of views and heterogeneity in worldview. Then there are other skills, like you can look for editing in terms of SEO, that is search engine optimization. You create more links, and in search engines your links would be coming at the top position. So that is how, if we look at the practices or say consumption related practices, we see mostly if you search something, we go for more at the top links given there, which we feel that would be more authentic and more related to our searches. So in that way, if your content is placed at the top on the search engine when the links are visible, so it will actually make a difference. So one can use the skills like search engine optimization to increase the content visibility. We see editing tools like refresh content could be used to maintain the content consistency. So if you are refreshing it, it would attract the audiences. Now the question which is still there when we look at our country, our community, and the relationship between mainstream and the marginalized sections, we see digital divide as the big challenge even today. So how and where do we see this divide, and how can we actually mitigate that divide in terms of creating the atmosphere for digital citizenship? It is important to understand. So digital divide is a part of marginalization in terms of lack of access and reach to the ICT and e-resources. So and how does it work? Actually, we can look at 3 steps where we see digital divide is working. So first of all, in terms of access to the technology itself, still there are people from, particularly we are talking about the marginalized section, where we see that people do not have technology related equipments. They do not have that facilitator or media itself in hands. So they do not have laptops, they do not have mobile phones. So they lack that technology itself. Then even if they have the technology, they do not have the access over the content or the consumable digital content that way. They do not know how to use it. At third level, when they get some digital media literacy, they start accessing it, then we see the digital divide is working at the level of participation, which is the key for mainstreaming of marginalization. So we do not see them using the content for their benefit first of all, and using the technology to create their own content, the need based content. So here we see at the third level, we see these 2 types of divides working there. So, moving on the understanding of the same, we can see that how the expanded theory includes subtitle, unidentifiable, subtle unidentifiable multiple deprivation in terms of the quality of access. It includes the ease to full access. For example, if an individual accessing the information cannot write an email, it cannot be called full access to the internet. So, again for example, in my own study where we visited Lalwadi village of Rajasthan, we saw that the girls were using mobile phones to watch the soap operas provided by the service provider, but they were not able to use the search engines for their own benefit. So, here we are actually talking about in terms of the quality when it comes to the digital divide. So, according to the Internet and Mobile Association of India, and here we are actually looking at certain positive figures in terms of when Nielsen report says in terms of mobile telephony that India has 10% more internet users in rural areas than in urban cities as of November 2019. But again we have to see whether there is a paradigm shift in terms of urban rural digital divide or not. So, internet available in vernacular languages over, and here we are coming to the positives of the newer technology in the competitive market given to us, which could be beneficial for us in understanding the challenges and how to mitigate it through using internet based technology for inclusion of the marginalized sections. So, we see internet available in vernacular languages over voice command became a path breaker in this direction. If you are not literate, no worry, you can just search anything over voice command, or you can produce the content over voice command too. So, the move resulted in increased interactivity and participation in e-governance. With wider knowledge base in user generated content, people are raising awareness on social media to make the authorities aware of the situation in almost every sector of governance like health, education, public distribution systems, framing sector, farming sector, etc. And we see that how people are being engaged even on the policy issues. So, we see that engagement coming in. Then we see marginalized sections or individuals and other stakeholders are engaging in dialogue for governance as never before. So, we see individuals participating, we see community participating, and they are looking towards how they can actually use this technology, internet based technology for their inclusion in the mainstreaming. And here Andre Lemos and Giulio Valentine calls this telematics culture with new practices of sociability, with more decentralization, with more reciprocity we can say, and more connectedness towards inclusive information society. Yet we have to look into the lacuna, we have to look into the gaps we still have, particularly when it comes to the marginalized individuals sections based on gender and class. Again, you observe it yourself on while accessing internet, the language, the content, the videos, is it inclusive enough? That is the question. So, we see the qualitative assessment also questions the type of content consumed, whether the content is useful in bringing social change, as asks Ashok Panikar when he explains the same in terms of news content that does not allow for the creation of nuance and analytical information and discussions which turn into debates. So, here if the content is manufactured only by few, again we need to understand the ownership in terms of production activities and authority on the filtered content, it will remain controlled by the similar traditional structures. Therefore, the question, who controls the system and activity? The problem of spectrum distribution, again in terms of ownership and authority, free Wi-Fi and net neutrality become other question involving the questions or say the concerns related to the digital citizenship. Here we are at the conclusion. In this session, we discuss the internet based media practices and emerging patterns like network embeddedness and heterogeneity, cyber optimism and cyber pessimism, digital divide and digital citizenship. We also examined the way the impact of the consumable media content works and its production and participation of the marginalized sections. We observed how the representation on internet blur the lines of public and private, political and personal, and why the visibility with increased network heterogeneity is essential. So, that was all in this session. Thank you very much.